mountains held their breath that night. Storm clouds gathered over Silverstone Keep like dark wolves circling prey, blocking out stars that had witnessed 1,000 pack ceremonies, 1,000 promises, 1,000 lies. Wind howled through ancient corridors where history lived in every carved beam and weathered stone, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain, and something sharper, betrayal waiting to unfold. Midnight arrived with the kind of silence that made even wolves nervous. Serafina Ashwood stood alone in the hallway outside her husband's private study. Her bare feet made no sound against cold floors, worn smooth by centuries of pacing alphas. The silk nightgown she wore offered little protection against the chill seeping through stone walls, but Serafina barely noticed. Her dark auburn hair fell loose around her shoulders, still damp from the bath she had abandoned, when restlessness drove her from her chamber. She had come searching for Kyle, not because duty demanded it, not because the council expected the Luna to track her alpha's movements. She came because something inside her heart had begun to shift in dangerous ways, pulling her toward him even when logic screamed to stay away. 3 months had passed since their wedding. 3 months since the council sealed a treaty and ceremony and declared Serafina Ashwood the Luna of Silverstone Pack. The marriage was never meant to be romantic. Everyone knew the truth. Two rival bloodlines had fought a brutal war that left territories scorched and bloodlines broken. The council chose marriage as the solution, binding Serafina to Alpha Kale Thorn, whether either of them wanted it or not. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, still flat beneath thin silk, but Serafina knew what grew inside. 3 weeks. The healer had confirmed it 4 days ago, her weathered face carefully neutral as she delivered news that changed everything. Voices drifted through the heavy wooden door. Kale's deep tone familiar now in ways that made Serafina's heart ache. And someone else. A woman's voice smooth and confident as poisoned honey. Isolde Ravencroft. Serafina's stomach clenched. Isolde served as Kale's chief advisor, a position she had held for years before Serafina arrived. Beautiful and brilliant, Isolde commanded respect from every wolf in the pack. She attended every council meeting, stood at Kale's right hand during ceremonies, and spent more time in his study than Serafina ever had. Rumors whispered through the keep. Some said Isolde had been Kale's lover before the council forced him to marry. Others claimed she still warmed his bed when political duties allowed. Serafina had dismissed the gossip as jealous speculation from wolves who resented her Luna status. Now standing in the dark hallway at midnight, Serafina's confidence wavered. Isolde's laughter drifted through the door. Light and mocking like wind chimes made of broken glass. Your little Luna looks at you like you hung the moon Kale. A pause thick with meaning. Does she actually know you only bed her out of duty? Serafina froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through bone. She pressed closer to the door, holding her breath, praying to gods she wasn't sure existed that Kyle would defend her. Tell Isolde she was wrong. Mention their connection, anything that proved Serafina meant more than a political arrangement. Kale's response came quieter, but she heard every word with devastating clarity. She's the council's solution to a war. Nothing more. Something sharp broke inside Serafina's chest. The kind of break that couldn't be mended with pretty words or false promises. The kind that left jagged edges cutting deeper with every breath. Isolde's voice turned softer, more intimate. Serafina could picture her moving closer to Kale, hand on his arm, body language promising everything Serafina couldn't give. Then why does a man like you refuse to take a real mate, someone who actually understands power? Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Serafina waited, her hand pressed against the door, feeling the wood grain beneath her palm, like she could somehow reach through and grab the words she desperately needed to hear. Kale would speak now. He would tell Isolde about their night together, about holding Serafina close while thunder shook foundations, about whispering promises against her skin, about the way they'd fit together like two halves of something powerful finally connecting. But Kyle said nothing. His silence destroyed her more completely than any words could have. Serafina's other hand moved to her stomach again. Protective instinct flared white-hot through her veins. The baby growing inside her deserved better than a father who saw its mother as nothing. Better than a pack where the Luna was mocked openly by the Alpha's advisor. Better than a home where love was just another political tool to be used and discarded. She stepped back from the door. Her hands shook. Her wolf went eerily silent inside her, as if understanding what Serafina's heart refused to fully accept. That night during the storm had been a mistake. A moment of weakness, Kale regretted. Nothing more. The hallway stretched before her, empty and cold. Behind that door, her husband sat with the woman he truly wanted, discussing politics and strategy, while his pregnant wife stood in darkness, unwanted and alone. Serafina turned and walked away. Each step felt like moving through deep water, her body heavy with grief she couldn't yet name. She would not cry. Not here where servants might see, not where her weakness could become tomorrow's gossip. She made it back to her chamber before the first tears fell. The beginning should have been different. 3 months earlier, Serafina had worn the Luna ceremonial gown with quiet dignity, white silk that flowed like water embroidered with silver thread depicting the moon's phases. The dress had been made for someone else, someone taller, broader in the shoulders, more befitting an alpha's mate. It hung slightly loose on Serafina's slender frame, a visible reminder that she was a replacement, a substitute. The council's second choice after their first plan for peace failed. The great hall of Silverstone Keep was packed with witnesses. 400 wolves from both packs crammed shoulder to shoulder, watching with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Serafina walked down the aisle alone. Her mother Bryn sat in the second row, face carved from granite, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the ceremony. No warmth, no encouragement. Just the cold acknowledgement that her daughter was being sold to end a war. Cale Thorne waited at the altar, 32 years old, broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore formal alpha attire, black leather, and silver clasps, symbols of authority etched into every seam. Powerful, untouchable. He looked at Serafina as she approached, his expression carefully neutral. No hatred, but no warmth either. Just the professional assessment of a man accepting a political arrangement. Elder Thaddeus Morrison presided, 70 years old with white hair and a face lined by decades of pack politics. He stood between the couple, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. We gathered today not just for a wedding, but for the ending of a war. His words fell heavy as stones. 22 months of conflict, 347 wolves dead, $8.4 million in damages, 12,000 square miles of territory disputed, blood spilled on both sides, families destroyed, futures stolen. Serafina felt the weight of every eye. She was Ashwood blood, enemy blood. Her father Aldrich had led the resistance against Silverstone expansion for 18 months before dying in the final battle. Some wolves in this hall had probably killed him. Others had lost brothers, sisters, parents to Ashwood forces. And now she stood here, wearing their Luna's dress. The council has determined that marriage offers the path forward, Thaddeus continued. Binding Alpha Cale Thorne of Silverstone to Serafina Ashwood creates alliance through blood. Future children will carry both legacies, both packs united under one leadership. Future children. Serafina's stomach twisted. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't let herself imagine what creating children with a man who saw her as nothing more than treaty terms would feel like. Alpha Cale Thorne. Thaddeus turned to the groom. Do you accept Serafina Ashwood as your mate, your Luna, your partner in leadership? Do you vow to protect, provide, and honor her according to pack law? Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I do. 2 words, flat, emotionless, like signing a business contract. Serafina Ashwood. Thaddeus turned to her. Do you accept Cale Thorne as your mate, your alpha, your partner in life? Do you vow to support, respect, and stand beside him according to pack law? Serafina's throat felt tight. She could say no, could turn and walk back down that aisle, consequences be damned. Return to what was left of Ashwood territory, live out her days in her mother's bitter shadow. But 347 wolves were already dead. How many more would die if the war resumed? I do. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Thaddeus produced the ceremonial binding cord, silver thread woven with both packs' colors. He wrapped it around their joined hands, speaking words in the old language that Serafina barely understood. Something about Moon's blessing in eternal bonds and strength through unity. The council recognizes this union. Alpha Cale Thorne, you may seal the bond. Cale was supposed to kiss her. That was tradition. The public claiming the visible symbol that they were now one. Instead, he simply gripped her hand. Firm, professional, like shaking hands after closing a business deal. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Whispers rippled through packed wolves. This wasn't how alpha bondings were supposed to proceed. Even political marriages usually included some pretense of affection. Cale didn't seem to notice or care. He released Serafina's hand and turned to face the assembly. The war is over. Both packs are now under Silverstone protection. Any wolf who cannot accept this new order is free to leave before sunset. Those who stay will swear loyalty to this leadership. Not to our leadership, not we as a unit. Just this leadership, keeping careful distance between himself and his new wife. The ceremony ended with formal declarations and treaty signings. Serafina signed her name to documents that transferred the remaining Ashwood territories to Silverstone control. Watched her mother sign away land that had belonged to their family for 6 generations. Felt pieces of her identity dissolving with every scratch of pen on paper. The wedding feast afterward was torture. Serafina sat at the high table beside Cale, smiled when expected, accepted congratulations from wolves whose eyes held no warmth. Isolde Ravencroft sat on Kael's other side, leaning close to whisper in his ear, hand resting possessively on his forearm. Nobody spoke to Serafina unless protocol demanded it. That night, the wedding night that was supposed to mark the beginning of their joined lives, Kael disappeared into his study. Serafina waited in the Luna's chamber alone, still wearing the ceremonial gown until dawn broke gray and cold through eastern windows. He never came. The weeks that followed established a pattern that would define their marriage. Serafina woke each morning in the Luna's chamber, a beautiful prison of silk bedding and carved furniture. She dressed in clothes servants laid out for her, ate breakfast alone in the small dining room adjacent to her quarters. The food was always excellent, prepared by chefs who never asked her preferences. By the second week, she started requesting specific meals. Simple things. Oatmeal with honey and berries instead of the elaborate egg dishes. Herbal tea instead of coffee. The kitchen staff complied, but with visible confusion. Apparently, the previous Luna Kael's mother, dead 5 years now, had preferred rich foods and strong spirits. Serafina was not the previous Luna. She would never be what they expected. She spent her mornings exploring the keep. Silverstone was massive, a fortress built into the mountainside over 2 centuries. Stone corridors connected dozens of wings. The council chambers occupied the eastern section. Living quarters filled the western wings. Training grounds and armory claimed the south. The north held the great library, dusty and neglected. Serafina claimed the library as her sanctuary. She had always loved maps. As a child, while other wolves learned combat and hierarchy, Serafina studied geography. Her father Aldrich had encouraged it, seeing strategic value in knowing terrain. By 16, she could sketch detailed topographical maps from memory. By 20, she had charted every inch of Ashwood territory, water sources, game trails, defensive positions, escape routes. Silverstone's library contained maps dating back generations. Serafina spread them across reading tables, comparing old boundaries to current holdings. She began creating her own master map, meticulously updating territory lines, marking recent changes, noting areas of dispute. The work absorbed her, gave her purpose beyond sitting decoratively at Kael's side during formal dinners. Dr. Marin Blackwood found her there on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into the marriage. Marin was the pack's head healer, 60 years old, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. She entered the library carrying a medical bag, her weathered face creased with something between concern and approval. The Luna who reads maps instead of gossip columns. Marin set her bag on the table. Interesting. Serafina looked up from a particularly detailed survey of the Eastern Territories. Is there something you need, Doctor? I need to examine you. Standard check for new Lunas. Should have been done 2 weeks ago, but you've been avoiding the healing wing. I'm perfectly healthy. That's for me to determine. Marin pulled out a chair uninvited and sat. Besides, health isn't just physical. How are you settling in? The question asked with genuine interest caught Serafina off guard. Nobody had asked how she felt. Not her mother, not the council, certainly not Kael. I'm adjusting. That's a politician's answer. Marin's gray eyes studied her with unsettling intensity. Let me be direct. This marriage was a political necessity. The council forced it on both you and the Alpha. Nobody expects it to be a love match. But I've seen what happens when Alphas and Lunas can't at least find mutual respect. It destroys packs from the inside. Serafina's hands stilled on the map. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me if he's treating you poorly, if you need protection. He's not treating me any way at all. We barely speak. Marin nodded slowly as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. The council warned him, right after the wedding, told him never to trust Ashwood blood, said emotional attachment would compromise his judgment as Alpha. The words hit like a physical blow. Serafina had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made it real. They actually said that Elder Thaddeus did most of the talking, but they all agreed. I was there for the medical briefing afterward. Marin's expression hardened. I disagreed then, and I disagree now. You're not your father, but changing old wolves' minds is like trying to teach stones to swim. Serafina looked down at her maps, all those careful lines marking territory and boundaries. How did you chart the geography of prejudice? Where were the escape routes from other people's hatred? Thank you for telling me. I'm telling you because you should know what you're up against. Marin stood, leaving her medical bag closed. And because I think you're stronger than they give you credit for. Those maps you're making, they're good, better than anything we've had in years. Keep doing that. Make yourself useful in ways they can't dismiss. She left Serafina alone with that advice and a growing understanding of her situation. The council saw her as a threat to be managed. Kael saw her as a political obligation. And she was completely, utterly alone. The storm came exactly 8 weeks after the wedding. Serafina had learned to read weather patterns as part of her meteorology training. Back in Ashwood Territory, she'd spent hours listening to NOAA radio broadcasts, teaching herself to interpret pressure systems and cloud formations. The skill had proven useful for planning hunts and avoiding dangerous conditions. That afternoon, she'd watched the western sky darken with the particular intensity that meant serious weather approaching. By evening, wind howled through the keep's corridors. By nightfall, rain hammered against stone walls with violence that matched the tempest building inside Serafina's chest. She stood at her chamber window, watching lightning split the sky. Thunder shook ancient foundations hard enough to rattle the glass. Nature's fury matched something rising in her own heart. Frustration at this half-life she was living, anger at being dismissed and ignored, loneliness so deep it felt like drowning. Her door opened without warning. Serafina spun. Kale stood in the doorway, soaked through. Water dripped from his dark hair. His shirt clung to broad shoulders, transparent from crossing courtyards in the downpour. But what stopped Serafina's breath was his eyes. Something raw and dangerous burned there. Something that made her wolf rise beneath her skin, responding to alpha command she couldn't resist. "We need to talk." His voice came out rough, barely controlled. Serafina's pulse hammered. "About what?" Kale closed the door behind him with careful precision. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud against the tempest's roar. "About this." He gestured between them, frustration radiating from every line of his powerful frame. "About us pretending this marriage means nothing. It doesn't mean anything. The council made that clear. The council doesn't dictate everything." Serafina's hands clenched at her sides. "You've ignored me for 8 weeks. What changed?" Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Kale's face in harsh white light. When he spoke again, his voice dropped lower, more intimate. "You changed things." "I haven't done anything." "You're here." His eyes held hers with intensity that made her stomach flip. "Every day you're here in my home, at my table, standing beside me during ceremonies, and I can't." He stopped, running fingers through wet hair. Water droplets scattered across stone floor. Serafina waited, barely breathing. The air between them felt charged electric, like the weather raging outside. "I can't stop thinking about you," Kale finished. The confession hit like physical force. 8 weeks of careful walls Serafina had built around her heart began cracking. "Kale." He moved closer, eliminating the space between them. "Tell me to leave. If you want distance, I'll give it to you. But if there's any part of you that wants this marriage to be real, I need to know." Serafina should have pushed him away. Should have remembered every cold dinner, every ignored greeting, every night spent alone while he worked in his study. Should have protected her heart from a man who saw her as the council's solution to a war. Instead, she reached up and touched his face. Kale's breath hitched. His hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his jaw. The contact sent heat racing through Serafina's veins, waking hunger she had buried deep. "I want," she started. "Say it. I want this to be real." Kale kissed her. His mouth claimed hers with desperate intensity, like a man finally surrendering to something he had fought too long. Serafina gasped against his lips, and he deepened the kiss. One hand slid into her hair, while the other pulled her body flush against his. The tempest raged outside, but Serafina barely heard it over the thunder of her own heartbeat. Kale's kisses moved along her jaw, down her throat. His hands trembled slightly as they explored her body through thin silk nightgown. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her skin. Serafina answered by pulling him toward the bed. What happened next was intense and passionate and deeply intimate. Kale touched her like she was precious, like she mattered, like their marriage was more than politics and peace treaties. He whispered her name against her shoulder, held her close when lightning split the sky, made Serafina believe for one perfect night that she was wanted about him. Afterward, they lay tangled together while rain drummed against windows. Kale's fingers traced lazy patterns on Serafina's bare shoulder, his body warm against hers. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For making you feel unwanted, for keeping distance." His arm tightened around her. "The council warned me against getting attached to you. They said you were a means to an end, that I should never forget your family's role in the war." Serafina's chest tightened, but Kale continued. "I tried to follow their advice. Thought staying distant would be easier. Instead, it just made everything worse." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You deserve better than what I've given you." "We can start over," Serafina whispered. "I'd like that." They fell asleep, wrapped in each other. For the first time since arriving at Silverstone Keep, Serafina felt like she belonged. Morning came too soon and brought the end of everything beautiful. Serafina woke to cold sheets and emptiness. Kale was gone. Pale dawn light filtered through eastern windows, painting everything in shades of gray. She sat up slowly, disoriented, looking for some sign that last night had been real. His scent lingered on the pillows. The impression of his body remained in rumpled sheets. But the man himself had vanished like morning mist. At first, Serafina tried to rationalize it. He had pack duties, responsibilities that demanded his attention, alpha business that couldn't wait. But as days passed and the distance returned, rationalization became harder. KL attended meals and council meetings, acknowledged Serafina's presence with polite nods, then disappeared into his study door firmly closed. Isolde was always there, of course, always leaning close hand on his arm, whispering in his ear with familiar intimacy. Their night together became a memory Serafina replayed endlessly, searching for clues she might have missed. Had she imagined the tenderness, misread his words? Maybe it meant nothing to him after all. Maybe she had surrendered her heart to a man who saw their intimacy as nothing more than a momentary lapse in judgment. 2 weeks after the tempest, Serafina's body started showing signs that would change everything. Morning sickness arrived first. She woke feeling dizzy, the scent of breakfast, cooking in distant kitchens, making her stomach revolt. She dismissed it as stress for the first few days. The emotional whiplash of Kael's renewed distance was enough to make anyone feel sick. But when her monthly cycle failed to arrive, Serafina knew. She waited several more days before visiting Dr. Marin's healing chambers, hoping perhaps she was wrong, hoping stress had simply disrupted her body's natural rhythm. Dr. Marin examined her with gentle efficiency, her experienced hands checking pulse points and pressure indicators. When she finished, she looked at Serafina with an expression that mixed concern and something almost like pride. "You're pregnant, Luna, about 3 weeks along." The words echoed in Serafina's mind as she walked back to her chamber. Her hand moved to her still flat stomach, protective instinct already rising fierce and unbreakable. Kael's child, the future alpha, growing inside her while Kael kept careful distance, and the council whispered about Ashwood blood that couldn't be trusted. Serafina needed to tell him. She had to. This wasn't just about their failed marriage anymore. This was about the future of the entire pack. Silverstone law was clear: the alpha's firstborn inherited leadership regardless of gender. She carried the true heir, and that gave her power she'd never possessed before. Except she didn't want power. She wanted a family, a partner who valued her, a home where her child would grow up loved instead of used as another political tool. The memory of Kael's words during their night together played through her mind. "You deserve better than what I've given you." He had meant it in that moment. She had felt the truth in his touch, heard it in his voice. So what happened the next morning to make him retreat again? Serafina decided she needed to understand before announcing the pregnancy, needed to know where she truly stood in Kael's world. Because if he still saw her as nothing more than the council's solution to a war, she couldn't raise their child in that environment. She would wait, observe, gather courage. Then she would tell him everything and hope that the man who had held her during the tempest was the real Kael Thorne, not the cold alpha who had ignored her for 8 weeks. That decision led her to his study door at midnight, seeking answers she would wish she'd never found. Now standing in her chamber with tears streaming down her face, Serafina finally understood the truth. Their night together had been real. Kael's confession had been genuine. But the council had gotten to him the next morning, reinforcing their warnings, threatening whatever leverage they held over him. And Kael, powerful alpha, Kael Thorne had chosen their approval over his wife's heart. Serafina's hand moved to her stomach, still flat, still hiding the secret that no one knew existed. A secret that changed absolutely everybody. She couldn't tell Kael now, couldn't give him the chance to use their child as another political tool, couldn't subject an innocent baby to growing up in a pack where its mother was dismissed as nothing. The decision crystallized with painful clarity. She would leave. Serafina moved mechanically through her chamber, pulling a weathered travel cloak from her wardrobe. She laced sturdy boots, the hiking boots she'd brought from Ashwood, broken in from years of mapping expeditions. She gathered a small pack, filling it with essentials. Gold coins she had saved from her monthly Luna allowance. A knife with a blade sharp enough to skin game. Dried provisions from her personal stores that servants kept stocked. She paused at her jewelry box. The Luna's ceremonial necklace lay inside heavy silver that marked her status. She had worn it during the wedding ceremony, feeling its weight settle around her throat like a collar. Like ownership, Serafina left it behind. Instead, she took only the simple pendant her father had given her before he died. A small wolf carved from moonstone, no bigger than her thumbnail. Aldrich had pressed it into her hand the night before his final battle, his weathered face creased with worry. "Never forget who you are, Serafina, no matter what they make you become." She fastened the pendant around her neck, feeling its familiar weight against her skin. Then she pulled an envelope from her desk drawer. Inside was the letter she'd found weeks ago while organizing her father's effects. Hidden in the false bottom of his field journal, written in Aldrich's careful hand. The letter had been addressed to her, marked "Open only in emergency." She had opened it anyway, desperate for any connection to the father she'd lost. The contents had shocked her. Coordinates to a safe house 39.7 degrees north, 106.4 degrees west. Instructions for finding the key buried beneath a particular blue spruce. A note explaining that he'd prepared this refuge years ago, knowing that war might one day force their family to run. If you ever need to disappear, this place exists, stocked with 6 months of supplies. No one from Silverstone knows about it. You'll be safe there until you decide what comes next. Serafina had memorized the coordinates immediately, filed the information away as interesting but irrelevant. She was Luna of Silverstone now. Why would she ever need to disappear? Now standing in her chamber at 3 in the morning with her heart broken and her baby's future at stake, those coordinates became salvation. She tucked the letter into her pack and took one last look around the chamber that had been her prison for 3 months. Expensive furniture chosen by interior decorators. Silk bedding she'd never selected. Everything beautiful and cold and utterly impersonal. Except the bed where KL had held her when lightning split the sky. Serafina forced herself to look away. She placed one hand on her stomach, whispering to the life growing inside, "You will never grow up where you're unwanted. I promise you that." Then she left. The keep slept as Serafina walked silent hallways. Her boots made soft sounds against stone, but no one stirred. Guards stood at their posts, but none questioned the Luna moving through her own home at odd hours. She pulled her hood up, keeping her face shadowed. The main gate stood open for the night watch rotation. Commander Ronan Sterling commanded the detail, a grizzled wolf in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He glanced at Serafina as she approached, recognition flickering across his weathered features. For a moment, she thought he might stop her. Demand an explanation. Ask where the Luna was going at 3 in the morning with a travel pack and hiking boots. Instead, Ronan simply stepped aside. "Safe travels, Luna." His voice held something Serafina hadn't heard from many Silverstone wolves. Compassion, understanding, like he knew exactly what drove her through those gates and into darkness. "Thank you," she whispered. Serafina walked through the gates without looking back. Behind her, Silverstone Keep rose against clouds like a monument to everything she was leaving. Somewhere in that massive fortress, Kale sat in his study, probably still talking with Isolde, discussing politics and strategy and matters far more important than the wife he had dismissed as nothing. He had no idea Serafina carried his child. He had no idea the future Alpha was walking away into the forest. By sunrise, the Luna would be gone, and Kale Thorne would wake to discover that some treaties, once broken, could never be repaired. Serafina's hand rested on her stomach as she walked into darkness. The mountains stretched before her, vast and wild and indifferent to pack politics. The coordinates from her father's letter burned in her memory, 60 miles northeast. 3 days of hard travel through difficult terrain. She had endured her father's death, endured a forced marriage to her family's enemy, endured 8 weeks of isolation and 2 weeks of heartbreak. She would endure this too. Behind her, the first gray light of dawn broke over Silverstone Keep. Serafina, Ashwood, Luna of nothing, mother of everything, disappeared into the wilderness. And the real story was only beginning. Dawn broke over the wilderness in shades of copper and ash. Serafina had walked through the night, her boots crunching against frost-covered leaves as she moved deeper into territory that belonged to no pack. Behind her, Silverstone Keep faded into morning mist like a half-remembered dream. Ahead, the Rocky Mountains rose in jagged peaks that scraped the belly of low clouds. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, restless and uncertain. Usually, Serafina felt her wolf's presence like a second heartbeat, constant, reassuring part of her fundamental self. Now silence stretched between them. Maybe her wolf was grieving too. Or maybe she understood that running was the only choice left. The forest thickened as elevation climbed. Oak and pine towered overhead, blocking most of the weak sunlight filtering through overcast sky. Wildlife scattered at Serafina's approach. Squirrels chittered warnings from high branches. Birds took flight in explosive bursts of wings. The natural world recognized a predator walking among them, even one in human form. Serafina paused beside a stream as the sun climbed higher. She knelt carefully, mindful of the baby growing inside her, and cupped cold water in her hands. The reflection staring back looked haunted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her face had gone pale with exhaustion and heartbreak. Auburn hair hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her reflection. The words felt like la, but she forced herself to believe them anyway, because the alternative was despair, and despair would kill her faster than any mountain winter. Serafina pulled dried venison from her pack and ate mechanically. Her body needed fuel, especially now. The pregnancy was barely 3 weeks along, too early for anyone to notice physical changes, but she felt the difference already. A heightened awareness in her senses, a fierce protectiveness that made her wolf finally stir with approval. She calculated distances in her mind, overlaying mental maps she'd memorized from Silverstone's library. The coordinates her father had written, 39.7 degrees north, 106. 4 degrees west, placed the safe house roughly 60 miles northeast of Silverstone's borders. She'd already covered maybe 8 miles through the night. 52 to go, 3 days of hard travel, maybe 4 if weather turned bad. Serafina shouldered her pack and continued walking. Her meteorology training told her another system was building. The particular quality of light, the way wind carried moisture, the pressure she could feel in her sinuses, all signs pointed to precipitation within 24 hours. She needed to make good time while conditions held. The boundary stones marking Silverstone territory appeared around midday. Ancient granite markers carved with pack symbols, worn smooth by centuries of weather. Beyond this point, she would be outside Kale's jurisdiction, no longer his Luna. No longer bound by the marriage contract the council had forced upon her. Free. Serafina stepped across the boundary without hesitation. Her wolf rumbled approval deep inside her chest. They were both tired of cages, even beautiful ones. Neutral territories stretched vast and wild ahead. Few wolves claimed these lands. Some rogues lived here, existing outside pack structure. Humans occasionally ventured into the deeper forests, but they rarely caused problems for wolves who wanted to remain hidden. Serafina could make it here. She was strong, trained in combat despite her father's attempts to shelter her. Her wolf was fast and intelligent. She knew how to hunt, how to track, how to read weather patterns, and find shelter. The skills her father had insisted she learn now meant the difference between survival and death. But being alone was different than being lonely. As afternoon's shadows lengthened, Serafina found herself talking to the baby. "Your grandfather would have liked you," she said softly, one hand on her stomach as she walked. "Aldrich Ashwood. He died before I could tell him about the marriage. Maybe that was mercy. He wouldn't have wanted me sold to end a war." The baby couldn't respond, obviously. But Serafina felt a flutter of warmth inside her chest, maternal instinct, fierce and unbreakable, and settling into her bones. "I'm going to keep you safe, I promise. No council will use you as a political pawn. No alpha will dismiss you as unimportant. You'll grow up knowing you're loved." Even if that meant Serafina raised the child alone in wilderness, she would make it happen. The safe house appeared just as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and gray. Serafina had been following her father's directions for the last 2 hours using landmarks he'd described in his letter. A lightning-struck pine with a distinctive split trunk. A creek that ran over flat stones creating a particular sound. Rock formations that looked like stacked giants when viewed from the eastern approach. The cabin sat tucked into a small clearing, backed against a rocky hillside that would provide windbreak from northern weather. The structure leaned slightly, weathered by seasons and neglect, but the roof looked intact. Logs had darkened to charcoal gray. A stone chimney rose from one end, sturdy despite years of disuse. Serafina approached cautiously, every sense alert for signs of previous occupants. But the clearing showed no fresh tracks, no scent markers, no indication anyone had been here recently. She found the key exactly where her father had indicated, buried beneath a gnarled blue spruce wrapped in oilcloth to prevent rust. The lock resisted, at first stiff from years of weather, but finally yielded with a protest of metal on metal. The door swung open on protesting hinges. Inside the cabin was exactly what Aldrich had promised. One main room with a fireplace, a loft space for sleeping, and supplies. So many supplies, shelves lined with preserved food in sealed containers. Medical kit with bandages and basic medicines. Tools for hunting and repairs. Thick blankets stored in waterproof bins. Even a small cache of weapons, knives, a crossbow, ammunition for taking large game. Her father had prepared this refuge with meticulous care. Probably over years, smuggling supplies here bit by bit, building a lifeline for his family if war ever made staying impossible. Serafina's throat tightened. Aldrich had died before seeing his careful plans used. But his love reached across death, protecting his daughter even now. "Thank you," she whispered to his memory. She spent the remaining daylight making the cabin livable. Dust covered every surface. She swept it away with a makeshift broom. Spiderwebs decorated corners. She cleared them carefully, relocating the spiders outside rather than killing them. A simple bed frame stood against one wall, stripped of its mattress. Serafina layered it with blankets from the storage bins, creating something soft enough to sleep on. By the time darkness fell completely, she had a fire crackling in the fireplace and water heating for tea. The cabin felt almost cozy. Not home, not yet, but shelter, safety, a place where she could catch her breath and figure out what came next. Serafina sat cross-legged before the fire, sipping tea made from herbs her father had stored. The warmth felt good against her skin. For the first time in hours, her muscles began to relax. Her hand moved to her stomach again. The gesture was becoming habit. Not much, she told the baby, but it's ours. No one can take it away. Sleep came easier than expected that night. Exhaustion pulled Serafina under like deep water, and for a few blessed hours she didn't dream of tempestuous nights, or Kael's hands in her hair, or Isolde's mocking laughter echoing through empty halls. The first week alone passed in a rhythm of survival. Serafina woke before dawn each morning. She checked traps she'd set using wire from her father's supplies. Rabbits, mostly sometimes squirrels. She skinned them with practiced efficiency, preserving the meat and stretching the hides for future use. Waste nothing. That was wilderness law. She gathered water from the creek, boiling it before drinking, despite the clear appearance. Parasites could hide in even the cleanest-looking streams. She walked the perimeter of her new territory each day, learning the land, mapping it in her mind the way she'd mapped Ashwood and Silverstone territories. Water sources here, game trails there, defensive positions, escape routes. Always planning, always prepared. Her meteorology training proved valuable. On the third day, she recognized the signs of incoming weather, dropping pressure, particular cloud formations, the way birds flew lower seeking shelter. She spent that afternoon reinforcing the cabin's roof and stockpiling extra firewood. The weather hit that night, not as violent as the tempest that had driven Kael to her chamber, but cold and persistent. Temperature dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind howled through the trees. Snow fell in thick curtains that turned the world white. Serafina sat by her fire wrapped in blankets and felt grateful for her father's foresight. The cabin's stone chimney drew smoke efficiently. The walls, though weathered, kept out the worst of the wind. She had food, water, warmth. She had made it. By the end of the first week, her pregnancy began showing subtle changes. Her breast felt tender and swollen. Morning sickness arrived, not severe, but enough to make certain smells unbearable. The scent of cooking meat sometimes turned her stomach. She learned to eat dried fruits and nuts for breakfast, instead, saving protein for later in the day. And the baby moved. So subtle she almost missed it. A flutter like butterfly wings inside her abdomen. There and gone, so quickly Serafina thought she might have imagined it. But it happened again the next day. And the day after that, growing stronger. "Hello," Serafina whispered, hand pressed against her stomach. "I feel you." The baby couldn't hear her yet. Too early for that. But Serafina talked anyway because the sound of her own voice broke the oppressive silence. "We're doing okay. Better than okay, actually. I caught 3 rabbits yesterday. The creek is still running, so we have fresh water. And I found a patch of wild herbs growing near the eastern rocks, yarrow and raspberry leaf. Dr. Marin taught me those are good for pregnancy." She paused, listening to wind in the trees. "Your father doesn't know you exist, but that's all right. We don't need him." The words sounded braver than she felt. The rogues came on the 9th day. Serafina was returning from checking her traps, a brace of rabbits slung over her shoulder, when she heard voices. Male voices, rough and unfamiliar, coming from the direction of her cabin. She froze immediately, set the rabbits down silently, drew the knife from her belt, 7 inches of good steel honed to razor sharpness. Moving with wolf-born stealth, she crept closer. 3 males circled her cabin in human form. Their clothes marked them as rogues, mismatched, worn, no pack colors or symbols. Dangerous men living outside pack law, beholden to no alpha's authority. The leader noticed smoke rising from her chimney. "Someone's here," he called to the others. "Could be just a human hunter," another suggested, "or a lone wolf. Either way, we could use these supplies." Serafina's mind raced. She couldn't fight 3 adult males, especially while pregnant. Running would be difficult through dense forest with them tracking her scent. Her best option was hiding and hoping they moved on after taking what they wanted. She circled wide, approaching the cabin from the back. Slipped inside through a window she left slightly open for ventilation. Grabbed her pack, already prepared with emergency supplies, always ready to run, and climbed into the loft space. She pulled the access ladder up behind her and lay flat against rough boards, barely breathing. The cabin door crashed open. "Empty," one of the rogues said. "But someone's definitely living here. Fire's still warm." "Check for supplies," the leader ordered. Serafina listened to them moving through her space, taking inventory of everything she'd worked so hard to gather and organize. Rage built under her fear. This was her home, her safety. They had no right. "Fresh food," one observed. "Whoever lives here can't be far. Probably just a human hunter. Leave the heavy stuff, take what we can carry." They began loading her preserved meat into their own bags, took her medical supplies, grabbed the best blankets. One of them found her cache of gold coins and whistled appreciatively. "Jackpot! This'll buy us a month of supplies in the nearest town." Serafina bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, fighting the urge to confront them. Getting killed defending dried meat would be stupid. She could gather more food. She couldn't replace her life or her babies. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, the rogues finally left. Their footsteps faded into distance. Silence returned, broken only by wind in the trees and her own hammering heartbeat. Serafina waited until she was absolutely certain they were gone before climbing down from the loft. The cabin looked ransacked, shelves empty, her carefully organized supplies scattered or stolen. Weeks of work gone in minutes. She sank to the floor, fighting despair. Then she forced herself to stand, to take inventory of what remained, to start over. Because that's what those who endure did. She spent the rest of the day reinforcing security, created a better hiding spot in the loft, stashing emergency supplies where looters wouldn't easily find them, set alarms using string and bells that would alert her to approaching visitors, moved her most valuable remaining possessions to a hollow in the hillside behind the cabin covered with branches and stones. By nightfall, she was exhausted and discouraged, but she'd made the cabin more secure. Next time, and there would be a next time, she knew that now she'd be better prepared. That night, Serafina allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to feel the full weight of her situation. Alone, pregnant, hundreds of miles from any friendly face, living in a cabin that rogues now knew existed. Then she dried her eyes, placed both hands on her stomach, and made a promise. Tomorrow we hunt. We rebuild our stores. We get stronger, because you're counting on me, and I will not let you down. Movement fluttered inside her, their child resilient as their mother. Serafina smiled despite everything. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Serafina was outside checking the alarm bells she'd installed when she heard footsteps. Her hand went immediately to her knife, but the woman who emerged from the trees had her hands raised, palms out in a gesture of peace. Easy, sister. I'm not here to hurt you. The woman looked to be in her late 30s, lean and weathered with dark hair shot through with gray and eyes that had seen too much. She wore traveling clothes, practical layers that could handle changing weather. No pack symbols, another rogue. Serafina didn't lower her knife. Who are you, Gwyneth Lockhart? And you're a long way from Silverstone territory, Luna. The title made Serafina flinch. I'm not. You don't have to explain. Gwyneth took a careful step closer. I recognized the look. Pregnant, running, terrified. I was you 5 years ago. Something in her voice made Serafina pause. You were a Luna. Gwyneth nodded. Riverbend Pack, Montana. My alpha made promises, broke them all. Council valued pack stability over my safety. So I left. She gestured to herself. Lived as rogue for 2 years before settling in a human town 30 miles east of here. Found work. Built a life. Serafina lowered her knife slightly. Why help me? Because no one helped me. And I made it anyway, but it was harder than it needed to be. Gwyneth pulled a pack off her shoulders. I've been tracking those rogues who hit your cabin yesterday. Saw what they took. Thought you might need some things. She opened the pack, revealing supplies. A better knife, longer blade, balanced for fighting. Waterproof tarp that would be invaluable in wilderness. Detailed maps of the region with safe routes marked. Even some preserved food to replace what was stolen. I can't pay you, Serafina said quietly. I'm not asking for payment. Gwyneth set the pack down. Consider it one Luna to another. We look out for our own even when packs won't. They sat together by Serafina's cabin, sharing coffee Gwyneth had brought. For the first time in over a week, Serafina felt less alone. They'll search harder than you think, Gwyneth warned. You're carrying the air. That changes everything. Your alpha won't just let you disappear. He's not my alpha anymore. Blood doesn't work that way. The baby makes you connected whether you want to be or not. Gwyneth's expression softened. But you're smart to run. Better to raise a child free than trapped in a pack that doesn't value you. She shared critical information. 50 miles northeast, there was a settlement called Pinewood. Mixed population humans and wolves who'd chosen to live outside pack structure. They didn't ask questions, didn't report to councils. A person could disappear there, build a new life under a new name. You should head there before winter really sets in, Gwyneth advised. This cabin's all right for now, but come December, you'll need better shelter. And you'll need a healer for the birth. Pinewood has both. They talked for hours. Gwyneth shared her own story in Alpha, who'd turned controlling, then violent. A council that told her to submit for pack unity. The night she'd finally run with nothing but the clothes on her back and determination to make it. The baby makes you vulnerable, Gwyneth said as she prepared to leave. But it also makes you stronger than you've ever been. Trust that. She disappeared into the forest the way she'd come, leaving Serafina, with supplies, information, and something precious proof that she could endure this. That other women had walked this path before and lived to tell about it. Serafina felt less alone. That night, sharp pain woke her from sleep, cramping in her abdomen, sharp enough to make her gasp. She sat up in darkness, hand pressed to her stomach, fear spiking through her veins. No, please, not the baby. The pain intensified. Serafina stumbled from bed lightheaded and terrified. She'd heard stories about early miscarriages, how easily pregnancies could fail in the first trimester, especially under stress. And she'd been under nothing but stress for weeks. Her hands shook as she lit a candle, found her father's medical supplies, remembered Dr. Marin's lessons about herbs that could ease cramping in pregnancy. Yarrow, raspberry leaf. Both grew wild near the cabin she'd spotted them during her explorations. Serafina forced herself to move despite the pain, stumbled outside into cold night air, found the herbs by moonlight, her wolf's enhanced vision helping despite the darkness, brought them back inside, boiled water with trembling hands, brewed tea that smelled earthy and bitter. She drank it down despite the taste, lay on her bed, one hand pressed to her stomach, breathing through the cramping. Please, she whispered to the baby, to the universe, to whatever gods might be listening. Please, this baby is all I have. 20 minutes passed, 30, agonizing stretches of time where Serafina existed in a space between hope and despair. Gradually, slowly, the cramping began to ease. The sharp pains dulled to mild discomfort, then to nothing. Serafina waited another 10 minutes before daring to believe it was over. Then the baby kicked, strong and deliberate, like saying, I'm still here. Serafina sobbed with relief. Her whole body shook. She'd come so close to losing everything. But Dawn found her still pregnant, still carrying Kyl's child despite everything working against them. The medical crisis changed something fundamental in Serafina's thinking. She couldn't do this completely alone anymore. Couldn't risk her baby's life on her own limited knowledge and supplies. She needed to reach Pinewood, find a healer, get proper prenatal care. She spent the next day preparing to abandon the cabin, packed everything she could carry, cached the rest in her hidden spot behind the hillside, left the cabin as she'd found it, door unlocked, available for the next person who needed shelter. By the following dawn, Serafina was moving northeast again, toward Pinewood, toward a future she couldn't yet see but had to believe existed. Behind her, the cabin disappeared into forest. Another chapter closing. Ahead lay 50 miles of wilderness, the approach of winter and uncertainty, but also possibility. The blizzard hit on the second day of travel. Serafina had seen it coming, dropping temperature, particular cloud formations stacking in the northwest. The way wildlife went silent, seeking shelter before the weather arrived. All her meteorology training screamed warnings. She'd hoped to reach a cave system marked on Gwyneth's map before conditions turned, but it arrived faster than predicted. Within 2 hours, light snow became a full whiteout. Wind howled through the trees with voices like dying wolves. Temperature plummeted to -5 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill drove it lower, -25 at least. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Snow fell in curtains so thick Serafina could barely see her own hands. She was in serious trouble. Hypothermia killed faster than most people realized, especially pregnant women whose bodies worked harder to maintain core temperature for 2. Serafina's hands had already gone numb. Her lips felt frozen. Violent shivers racked her body. She recognized the signs: early-stage hypothermia moving toward moderate if she didn't find shelter immediately. Through the whiteout, she spotted a rock outcropping, not a cave but an overhang that would provide some protection from wind. She stumbled toward it, her movements becoming clumsy and uncoordinated. Another bad sign. She managed to pull the waterproof tarp from her pack with fingers that barely worked. Rigged it against the rocks to create a makeshift shelter. Built a fire with difficulty, the matches kept slipping from her numb fingers. But eventually, blessedly, flames caught and grew. Serafina huddled under the tarp as close to the fire as safety allowed, wrapped herself in both blankets she'd brought, tried to conserve heat while waiting for the blizzard to pass. Her core temperature was dropping. She could feel it, the dangerous warmth that came before the final cold, the fuzzy thinking, the temptation to just sleep. Can't sleep, she told herself out loud. Sleep means death. She forced herself to stay alert, to keep the fire fed, to talk to the baby even though her words came out slurred. Stay with me. We're fighters, both of us. We've weathered worse. Had they, Serafina's confused mind couldn't quite remember what could be worse than freezing to death alone in a blizzard while pregnant. Images drifted through her consciousness. Kyle holding her when rain hammered the walls, his hands in her hair, his voice saying her name like a prayer. She woke with a start, realizing she'd been drifting off. That was bad. Very bad. No, she slapped her own face, trying to shock herself back to full awareness. Stay awake. Keep moving. She forced herself to exercise in the small space, flexing muscles, creating friction, generating heat any way she could. The night lasted forever. Serafina drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she dreamed Kale was there holding her, keeping her warm. Other times she knew she was alone. The line between dreams and reality blurred dangerously. But dawn came eventually. Always did. The blizzard broke as gray light filtered through dissipating clouds. Serafina emerged from her shelter stiff and frozen but alive. Her fire had burned down to embers. The tarp had collected 6 inches of snow. She was hypothermic but functional. She'd made it through. Serafina broke camp with movements that felt like wading through honey. Everything took 3 times as long as it should. But she managed. Packed her supplies, kicked snow over the fire pit, started walking northeast again. Movement inside her, their child strong as ever. "We made it," Serafina whispered. "Nothing will stop us now." She almost believed it. The howling started 3 days later. Serafina was maybe 15 miles from Pinewood, according to her maps. The terrain had grown more rugged. Pine forests gave way to rocky slopes. Elevation climbed enough that her breath came harder. She'd stopped to refill her water from a stream when she heard it. Wolf song, organized patterns, not the random howling of wild packs, but the structured communication of wolves running in formation. Search patterns, Silverstone search patterns. Serafina's blood ran cold. She'd recognize those call and response sequences anywhere. She'd studied pack tactics as part of her father's strategic training. Silverstone used distinctive formations, overlapping sweeps designed to cover maximum territory with minimum gaps. They were looking for something, for someone, for her. Serafina abandoned her water bottle and ran. Her pregnant body protested the sudden exertion, but adrenaline overrode discomfort. She had to put distance between herself and those searchers, had to reach Pinewood before they found her trail. The howls grew closer, maybe 2 miles behind her now, moving fast. Serafina tried crossing streams to break her scent, tried rocky ground where tracks wouldn't show. But she was leaving a trail, she knew it. Blood on thorns where branches scratched her, disturbed vegetation, the faint scent marker of her passage that trained trackers would recognize. She wasn't going to make it to Pinewood. Not with wolves running organized search patterns between her and safety. Her only option was to hide. Find somewhere to hole up and hope they passed by without detecting her. A clearing appeared ahead. Serafina burst through the tree line and stopped dead. 3 rogue males stood in the clearing, the same 3 who'd robbed her cabin 2 weeks ago. She recognized the leader's scarred face, and behind her, the organized howling of Silverstone search wolves drew closer. Serafina was trapped. She backed against a massive oak tree, drawing her knife with shaking hands. The rogues turned to face her. Recognition flickered across their faces. "Well, well," the leader said. "The cabin Luna. We've been looking for you." "Stay back." Serafina's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Someone's paying good money to find you. Very specific instructions. Pregnant Luna from Silverstone. Bring her back unharmed." Serafina's mind raced. Who would hire rogues to track her, the council Kale? Who hired you? The leader smiled, showing too many teeth. "Don't ask client names, just follow orders and collect payment. Now you can come quietly or we can make this difficult." "I'd rather die." "That's not part of the deal. Orders are to bring you back alive." The rogue took a step closer. Serafina raised her knife. She knew this was hopeless. 3 adult males against 1 pregnant female. But she'd fight anyway, for her baby, for her freedom. The massive black wolf that burst through the tree line moved so fast it was barely visible. One moment the clearing was empty except for Serafina and the rogues. The next 200 pounds of pure alpha fury stood between them, lips pulled back from fangs the size of daggers. The wolf shifted mid-stride, bones cracking and reforming with supernatural speed. Kale Thorne emerged from the transformation, naked and furious and more dangerous than Serafina had ever seen him. "Touch her," he said, voice dropping to lethal calm, "and I'll rip your throats out." The 3 rogues spun to face him. Recognition flashed across their faces. Every wolf in the region knew Alpha Kyle Thorne by sight. "Alpha Donovan," the leader said carefully. "We didn't realize she was yours." "She's my mate." Kale moved between Serafina and the rogue's body language, promising violence. "Carrying my child. Now explain why you're threatening her." The rogues exchanged glances. The leader spoke reluctantly. "We were hired to find her. Bring her back to Silverstone." "Hired by who?" "A female wolf, dark hair, important position. She paid $12,000 cash. Gave us specific instructions." Serafina watched Kale's expression shift from fury to something colder, more dangerous. "What instructions?" The rogue hesitated. "What? Instructions. Find the pregnant Luna. Keep her hidden in the wilderness. Make sure she never returns to the pack. We weren't supposed to kill her, just ensure she stayed lost. Until she..." He trailed off. "Until she what?" "Until she miscarried from stress, or gave up and died from exposure. Either way, problem solved." The clearing went silent except for wind in the trees. Kale's hands clenched into fists. When he spoke, his voice carried alpha command that made even Seraphina's wolf want to submit. Get out of my territory, all of you. If I see you near my mate again, I will hunt you down personally and make your deaths last days. Do you understand? The rogues fled. Seraphina and Kale stood alone in the clearing. He turned to face her and she finally saw him clearly. He looked terrible, exhausted, haunted, desperate. His eyes tracked over her body, cataloging every detail. The travel-worn clothes, the knife gripped, white-knuckled in her hand, the visible swell of pregnancy beneath her cloak. Seraphina, he said. Just her name, but it carried so much weight. She flinched. Don't. I need to explain. There's nothing to explain. You made your feelings clear. That conversation wasn't what you think. You called me the council's solution to a war. Nothing more. Kale took a careful step closer. I was lying to Isolde, trying to maintain distance because the council warned me against getting attached to you. Seraphina's grip on the knife tightened. You expect me to believe that what happened between us meant everything to me. Holding you, being with you, it made me realize I'd been in love with you since the day you arrived at Silverstone. His voice broke slightly. But the next morning, the council cornered me. Elder Thaddeus threatened to challenge my leadership, said emotional attachments compromise alpha judgment, that I couldn't trust Ashwood blood, that you were politics, not partnership. He moved closer, hands raised like approaching a wounded animal. I listened to them instead of my heart. I thought maintaining walls would protect the pack. Instead, it just drove away the only thing that mattered. Tears slipped down Seraphina's cheeks. You hurt me. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry, Seraphina. Kale gestured to her stomach. That's my child. Our child, and I want to be part of their life, part of your life, if you'll let me. You'll just hurt me again. I won't. I swear on my pack, on my life, I will never dismiss you again. He stopped just outside her personal space. I love you, Seraphina. I have loved you for months. I was just too stupid and scared to admit it. The confession hung between them. Seraphina searched his face for lies, for any sign this was manipulation. But she saw only truth, raw and painful and completely genuine. Her knife dropped from fingers gone numb. I was so scared, she gasped. I thought I was completely alone. Kale caught her as she collapsed forward. His arms came around her, solid and warm and real. Seraphina sobbed against his chest, weeks of fear and loneliness and desperation pouring out in racking cries. Never again, Kale promised, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I swear to you, Seraphina, never again. His hands moved to her stomach, feeling the swell of their child. Will you come home? Seraphina pulled back enough to look at his face. Only if things